Anything that your school does that ignores the wide variation of human beings that walk through your doors each day is guaranteed to fail.
You're listening to the NAESP Principal Podcast, where school leaders connect around real challenges, real experiences, and real growth. In today's episode, Universal Design for Learning: Why One Size Fits All Doesn't Work and What Does. Host Liz Garden and Dr. Scott McLeod talk with Dr. Kristan Rodriguez about what it takes to create schools where every learner can succeed. From understanding student variability and building systems that work to shifting from compliance to authentic engagement, this conversation explores practical strategies for implementing universal design for learning in your school. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the NAESP Principal Podcast. My name is Liz Garden. I am the proud principal of the Henry P. Clough Elementary School in Mendon, Massachusetts. And I also have the honor of being a co-fellow for the Center for Innovative Leadership with NAESP. And I'm joined today with my favorite co-fellow, who's going to introduce himself.
Thanks, Liz. It's okay to say my name.
It's okay. I'm letting you do it.
Scott McLeod, professor of school leadership at the University of Colorado, Denver, and founding director of a university center called CASTLE, the first university center in the country focused on leadership, innovation, technology, and deeper learning.
Yes, and I am so excited. We interview a lot of people, but today's guest has a special place in my life. We have Dr. Kristan Rodriguez, and a few years ago, we may or may not have worked together in a district in Massachusetts. She is a leader who I respect and loved learning from and continue to stay in touch with. So we're so excited to have her here on the podcast with us. I'm going to let her introduce herself, but she is a innovative leader. She is a reflective leader. She is highly focused on MTSS and UDL and all things that we love to talk about here at the Center for Innovative Leadership. So, Kristan, would you tell everybody else? I know you really well, but not all of our listeners know you. So please introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, how you got to this point in your life.
Thank you so much. It's just so amazing to be across the table with you again, Liz, because what she talks about on this podcast, she lives in practice. She's a wonderful principal. It was my honor to work with her when I had that opportunity. And we absolutely stay in touch because I'm just so impressed with the work that she continues to do. My name's Kristan. I own a company called Commonwealth Consulting Agency. We are out of Humacao, Puerto Rico, but we do a lot of service to hundreds of schools in the United States. I'm a former principal, assistant principal, and principal central office administrator, including being a superintendent of schools. And so I have just such healthy respect for the work that is done in the schools. And our company is by practitioners for practitioners, and we really care about making sure that schools are successful for all staff and all students. And we focus on MTSS and Universal Design for Learning as core components of our support.
Awesome. You want me to start with the first question, or do you want to dive in?
All you.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I think we've been talking. Scott has had a chance to travel around the country and visit schools that are really trying to do school differently. And we've been talking about the importance of student agency. And so maybe let's start with that. Tell us a little bit about either what you are seeing in the schools that you're working with, or what you are hoping to see happening more and more in schools. Because I think I was just saying to Scott, I had read an article recently and was talking about where we really need to be moving away from the age of achievement learning to the age of agency learning. And that is a big shift, a big mindset shift for not just within our school walls, but outside of the school walls. So let's just start there about what you're seeing and what you're hoping to see.
We're seeing a lot of reaction to AI right now in education. And, where we really used to spend a lot of time, as a former high school English teacher, I would spend time having them, summarize a thesis and write an essay for me and memorize certain aspects of history and relate it to the text and things like that. And so a lot of that, a lot of the tasks that we used to do, our students can go home right now and use generative AI and spit that back. And so it's really important that we engage in learning activities that are centered around agency so that they find them meaningful and relevant and don't default to regurgitation and compliance-driven tasks. And one of the ways that we've been focusing on that is to ensure that we are lighting up that affective network of their brain. And Universal Design for Learning allows us a mechanism into lighting up that part of the brain, which is essential to authentic learning. And if we make learning experiences that students care about and are engaged in, then they're not doing it for purposes of compliance. And so that's a lot of the work that we're seeing right now. Tasks that were in the past really important for them to understand. It's more about making meaning of that work now and utilizing the information for things to make the world better, a better place to understand ourselves. AI can do lots of things. It cannot do many things that we as humans can do. And so it really provides a window into creating classrooms where the students are directing their own learning and educators are facilitators of that learning process.
I think it's interesting because student agency, as you said, implies this notion that you get to direct your own learning, which includes choosing the directions that you learn. And of course, students are embedded deeply within state and district policies and mandates and structures where you don't actually get very much choice about what you learn, right? And so students are naturally turning to AI to get rid of some of those learning tasks that they find less meaningful as quickly as possible. And I think, the big challenge that I'm thinking about here is that we have a lot of recent research that talks about the importance of background knowledge. And how do we get kids to invest in the background knowledge necessary that they may find meaningless, that would allow them to do the more complex work later that they will find to be meaningful.
And a lot of people, I think, you're not doing this, but some people misinterpret Universal Design for Learning and think it's all about choice and options and menus. In many ways, it's about respecting variability and providing accessibility to students. One of the core principles is firm goals, flexible means. The goals are standards, grade level standards. All students should have access to that. So students can't necessarily get to pick and choose, I don't want to learn this or not. What they're involved in is understanding what their needs are as learners and ways to approach that. So there's multiple means of how we represent that knowledge to them and multiple means in which they can demonstrate their learning, action, and expression. When there are tasks that are standardized, that does not excuse them from being able to respond, because in life there are ways that we're going to have to do things in mechanisms. And really where Universal Design for Learning comes in is that they understand why, that they need to learn this, and that we create accessibility for them so that they can be successful. We're removing barriers for them so that they can be successful on some tasks. And where it's not required, our students have to know how to write. They have to be writers. Where it's not, and we're teaching them how to write a certain way, they're all going to write that way, but we're going to create resources and scaffolds and supports for them to do that. But if that's not the task, if we're not requiring them to have to write that way, what other ways can we get them to demonstrate their learning? Because in our lives, we have things and tasks that we have to do, and then we have a flexibility in other ways. And so we want to create those environments. So that concept of engagement really is involved around them understanding why they're learning what they're learning. And in many ways, we're giving them tools so that they can be successful. Because it's a lot of times that's when they check out, or that's when we see some behavioral challenges from dysregulation with them, is when they feel like they can't be successful or they're bored or other areas.
I hear that and I appreciate that. And I'm also thinking that, students will hang with us for the have to stuff if they know they're also going to experience some get to stuff. And I just think for too many kids, there's too much have to stuff and not near enough get to stuff. So even if we're providing some agency and choice and recognizing variability within the have to stuff, it's still have to stuff.
Yeah. And, there's a lot around, where we support the science of reading and teaching of reading. That is have to stuff. But the texts that they read are what will get them engaged. So there's ways to ensure, if we're talking about, text comparison or, making connections to the real world, there's absolutely opportunities for us to engage them in that have to stuff in ways that is not the same for all, so that they have that opportunity to do that, because we do understand that there are expectations and standards for students, but how we engage in that can and should look different. So we always talk a little bit about, I was approached by high school teachers, English teachers, and do we have to all do the same book every summer for that summer reading list? Are there other ways? And so we really went through those standards and found out that there were opportunities for them to engage in standards such as doing a podcast or reading books for accessibility for other people, writing and drafting a one-act play, reading something of choice, and then having a book club, so that there's opportunities to access those standards, but not the same for all.
So, you work with a lot of different schools, a lot of different leaders. I definitely support and understand the need for universal design for learning and for working to embed student agency into schools, but not everybody is there. What are some starting points to help leaders who this is a new concept for them? I mean, and sadly, that is the truth in many schools that we go into, that this isn't even on their radar necessarily, and not to their fault, but because we're in a system of traditional schooling that is slow to change.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we like them to do is engage as leaders first, so that they understand what the principles of universal design for our learning are, and they begin to model them, just as you did in your leadership in your school. When you model universal design for learning with your staff at faculty meetings and professional development sessions, they participate and understand the value of that work. We always start with a cohort of willing participants, and then we let that cohort grow, model, provide professional development along the way. What we see with our administrators is they see positive outcomes for all. A lot of people sometimes think, well, if you are designing UDL in mind, you're lowering the standards or expectations and rigor. It's actually the opposite. We always talk a little bit about how after our high school math department did coursework and effort around universal design for learning, their AP scores were the highest they could be, 5s, 100% of the students for calculus A, B, and BC. So that's our, a great level of rigor, expectations. And at the elementary level, they will see increases in their reading levels and in their mathematical application. So that will come out on any kind of universal screening measure or any other indicator that is used in the school. When they see those outcomes, then they there's a lot more buy-in. But it's more than just the outcomes. It's the fact that the students are less disruptive in the schools, that in the classrooms, they're more engaged. It's creates a really community within the classroom. And when we talk about student agency, that means that the students are actively involved in their own learning, which ultimately is the outcome that we would want from our education system, that they are responsible for their learning and they see that component. And that begins with pre-K. I mean, this is not something that has to be dedicated at the secondary level. The littles, we did that quite well, where they're engaged. They understand things like mastery-oriented feedback. They offer that to their peers. They accept that as a form of growth. And we as leaders model that in our practice. It's why we wrote that book, Universally Designed Leadership, many years ago, because we wanted to say we have to be the model for this. If we're going to expect our staff to do that, we have to put the work in as administrators.
School leaders often talk about the importance of paying attention to who their students are and what they bring into the building each day. At NAESP's annual conference in Seattle, we captured reflections from principals across the country. One of those voices is Jackie Underwood, principal of Preston Smith Elementary School in Texas, who shared a reflection rooted in joy.
This morning, our keynote session focused a lot on a word that it's pivotal to me, but sometimes I feel like, you need to tone that down. No, you're too much for that, JC. But the word is joy. And that sounds like an interesting probably takeaway from the outside, but it helped me realize to be true to who I am. What is my spirit? What's the gift that I can bring to my school? What's the gift that I can bring to my community, to Texas, and to NAESP? But it was to bring out that joy and use that for myself, but also the value of finding that joy and that genius in every single child that I have the opportunity and the privilege of supporting, and to find that joy in my staff and their families. So that joy is huge, and I loved and appreciated that so much this morning.
If you're looking to learn more about Universal Design for Learning, MTSS, or creating more inclusive learning environments, NAESP offers resources to support the work. Visit NAESP.org and search for Universal Design for Learning, MTSS, or Inclusive Practices in the Resource Hub. You can explore tools, articles, and professional learning opportunities designed for school leaders. Now, back to the conversation.
I run a couple principal licensure cohorts in my role as professor, and one of my mantras is that anything that your school does that ignores the wide variation of human beings that walk through your doors each day is guaranteed to fail. And it feels to me often that in many schools, MTSS is one of those processes, right? Like it seems, MTSS and this whole idea of tier one instruction where there's a, quote, best way, unquote, to reach the most students at once, right? And it's only when we start hitting tiers 2 and 3 that we start thinking about variability and whatever. Can you help us reconcile that idea?
Absolutely, thank you. So, Todd Rose talked about the myth of average, and that all students and all staff members have variability in their learning. Even if they have similar cognitive levels, they all have variability in their learning. And when we create the accommodations within our buildings and within our classrooms for all students to access, then they find that there's less need to respond to students who might not have gotten it the first time because those scaffolds and supports are there. So I often use an analogy like a curb cut in a sidewalk. That little ramp in the sidewalk, it really was created for accessibility. Actually, universal design out of architecture, came before universal design for learning, and that was for wheelchair accessibility. How many of us have used a curb cut for something other than wheelchair accessibility, whether we have a stroller or our luggage and we're traveling? And so we want to create those curb cuts in all classrooms so that we don't have to differentiate for every single student, that happens in the onset of our planning. We create those classroom accommodations for all students. If you have noise canceling headphones in your classroom for students that have strong sensory challenges and they can get overwhelmed, those same noise canceling headphones can be available and put in the front of the classroom for kids that have migraines, for kids that struggle with attention and really need to concentrate, and they can use it. It takes the stigma out of the use of those, and it becomes just a resource for all. So I think that that's a really great way to address that concept of variability, is it's not that one particular student, but it's like what might be the barriers for students, and everyone should be able to access those accommodations within the class.
So I think what I just heard you say is that if you design for variability in tier 1, you reduce the need to use tiers 2 and 3 as accommodations for variability.
Yes, and there's a common saying that we say, you can't intervention your way out of poor tier 1 instruction. And that same level of universal design needs to be available at tiers 2 and 3 as well, because there are going to be students that need additional support. Tier 3 is not synonymous with special education, and that's one of the things that we completely continue to fight against, which is they need to be identified to see a reading specialist or some kind of intensive need. No, if they have that need, regardless of disability, if they have a disability, they receive it through an IEP, and if not, they still have access to that reading specialist to help them address those. So it is a very proactive approach. We don't want our kids to fail to receive the supports and services. We want to be proactive in how we offer those.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about this too, I feel like there's a population that we actually haven't talked about much on this podcast, is that I think about our parent population and parents and guardians, and how, we talk a lot about how we're still trying to educate our educators about this whole mindset shift. But, hearing you talk about providing different, the headphone example, there are parents that would see that and say, you shouldn't be allowing that to happen, or why does this kid need that, or my kid doesn't need that, or, and so I think that's another area that we have to always remember we have to educate our communities as well, because I think we are behind in that as well. Of like we're trying to make these changes in schools, and then our communities are way back, and they're advocating for things that are actually not what we should be advocating for.
So a couple of ways to combat that is to model that. So I used to, when I do professional development, big auditoriums of teachers, I gave headphones because I'm really loud, and we just actually joked about that before the beginning of the podcast, and I make that available because some people found that was too loud, and really modeling that in our parent engagement is also helpful. Where we won them over was when the outcomes of their students, when their students were coming home happier, when they were more successful in their classrooms, where they didn't see a decline in performance, they saw increase in performance. And kids will tell them, I needed it that day. I wanted it that day. And it helped me. So I think it's just not only, like you said, it is absolutely about education, but it's, again, also modeling it. And then when they see the impact of it, they're much more open to that concept. We see something similar with co-teaching, right? Where they're like, I don't want to be in that classroom. Then they see the outcomes of their students, and it's really high, and it's a really wonderful, engaging classroom. And they step back and say, oh, I'm really glad they're in that classroom now.
Kristan, are there particular schools or districts that you think are doing this well? Where do you find your sources of inspiration?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So, we have had amazing opportunity to work with districts over multiple years, either through statewide academies that will fund this for districts, or just in, working individually with them. That's where we see the most success. And we've seen it at every level. We've seen it at vocational schools. We've seen it at charter schools. We've seen it at traditional schools, elementary schools, pre-Ks. And it comes down to an investment in this being a systems level shift and not a one-off workshop. We go out and we do keynotes and things, and they get super inspired and they love it, but there's no follow through. I say the rain's not hitting the ground. And so in order to really make sure that this is happening, you have to embed ongoing opportunities, not just for professional learning, embedded coaching, but also instructional planning with their curriculum materials during embedded times in the day, so that they have ongoing opportunities and support to implement those practices and grow and build, and options for professional development. You might want to take a grad course. You might want to start with a multi-part learning series. You might want to sign up for the coach. You might want to become a mentor yourself. So really making sure that it's a systems level response. That's where we see high impact.
So I think most school systems actually are pretty poor at their systems, right? Richard Elmore at Harvard used to say that schools have very low internal accountability. And for those of you who are not familiar with the concept, the idea is that it doesn't actually matter what the accountability mandates are on your school organization from outside, say the state or the feds, if you don't have good internal accountability where you have the ability to actually do what you say you value. And so, Elmore would note over and over again that most school organizations actually are very poor at implementing good, rich, robust systems that help them travel from point A to point B and actually accomplish the things that they say they want to do.
Yeah.
As a former superintendent, maybe you can help us think about why is that true for so many schools? Why do we instead hop from fad to fad?
Yeah.
Teachers know the phenomena that if we just wait out the new soup or the new curriculum director or the principal in a couple of years, it'll be something new, right? Whatever, right? Like, why do we have such trouble with long-term sustainable systems?
I think often it's a form of compliance that they're engaged in that work as opposed to authentic engagement. So we can get them strategically compliant, we can get them to do the work, but we can't get them to care about the work unless they're involved in it from the beginning. And what we did when we implemented these systems and we saw significant outcomes in our school district was from the onset they were involved, from conversations about what's working and what is not working to how would you like to do this, and how, we'd have professional alignment with the professional development committee, which was well represented by staff and teachers, not just an administrator in a building and in an office by themselves, and really made sure that they were part of the process of how we got that. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of when I stepped away as superintendent, it continued, the work continued after I left. And I thought that was the best representation of what I consider success, which is that it's not contingent on one person, it's organizationally driven. I think from the perspective of what makes this work with the teachers in the classroom is that they start to see that it works, and what we call integrity measures. Fidelity measures is kind of like an F word right now because it's very, accountability driven. So it's an integrity measure. We define that. So we create systems of, UDL observation look-throughs and UDL lesson plan vetting protocols and ways that we engage in it. But they are participating, not some outside group of staff from, central office staff. We can do learning walks to learn from it, but the staff members themselves are involved with that, with the coaches. And then sometimes they'll work with organizations like us to come in and do some of those observations and give them some insight of this is what's really working and here's some ways you want to make some shifts.
When you're talking about that, I was going back to remembering when Kristan and I worked together, and I haven't had this experience since, maybe someday in another district. She pulled together not just administrators and teachers and parents, but community members too. I mean, we spent it was like Saturdays.
Yes, we did, unfortunately.
On Saturdays, but that stuck with me that we had all people from the community involved and invested in talking about the needs for our students, our kids' education. I mean, that is powerful stuff. Sure. And if that could happen more often, I don't know.
And it was wonderful. And we would go out into the community, and we would go out into, the senior center and where they are when they're having their meetings. But we had elected officials at that. We had parents at that. And we did choose the weekend because there were barriers to do it during the day or in the evening during the week. And so we wanted to make sure that there was availability for their participation. And not only did they help us to find, where we were, we did needs assessments, and then we share that out with the greater community, but they helped us articulate our goals as a community, not just as a school district. Mm-hmm. And then they helped us frame it in ways that were accessible to non-educators. We stripped it of edu jargon so that they understood the importance. And we did have community-wide commitment to that. We didn't get a lot of pushback because they understood the why. Mm-hmm. And we did share where we were struggling, and that's hard to do sometimes. Mm-hmm. We were always clear that we were legally compliant and doing all the things we had to do, but here's where we would like to improve. And there was openness to them because we were vulnerable and shared where we were. And then when we had the successes, they felt participatory in that and proud of that themselves.
Well, we could spend all day talking here, but sadly we can't because we need to make a podcast be short, bite-sized. But tell our listeners how they can find you.
Fantastic. So our website, www.cca, which represents Commonwealth Consulting Agency, CCA-PR, we're located in Puerto Rico.com. You can reach me that way, or my phone, 339-227-2155. That's my personal phone. I am really invested in this and love to have conversations with practitioners. So give me a call. My kids are all grown and out of the house. I have no life. Reach me at any time. Or my name is Kristan, Kristan at cca-pr.com. You can email me as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Kristan Rodriguez. And that has been another amazing episode of the NAESP Principal Podcast. We will talk again soon.
The NAESP Principal Podcast is produced by the National Association of Elementary School Principals. Learn more about our community and membership at NAESP.org. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the NAESP Principal Podcast and share it with a colleague. Together, we're building stronger schools and stronger leaders.